Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I am SocioPsycho and this is Mob Reviews, and today we're going to be taking a look at Hand of Fate. This was created by Defiant Development, available for PC, Mac, and Linux. It is a pick-your-adventure style freedom theme card game roguelike style gameplay. It's all got a couple different techniques thrown together, but how well does it actually work and how well does it actually handle? And that's the important thing. There is a lot of hype and a lot of fandom around this game. Is it deserved or is it just that hype? Let's find out, and we will begin in the options menu. Now, when we go into the options menu, it does have different variables on the audio. The music is not anything really momentous. It's alright, but you're definitely not going to walk away from a game and be like, oh yeah, that soundtrack was so amazing, I have to get my hands on it. It was alright. The voice acting done in the game is just really the interaction between you and the card dealer, as that ties into the story element, which we'll talk about in a moment. The audio is done very professionally. Oh, sometimes he just won't shut up. Now that just may be me, but it just feels like when you continuously fly through this game, because it's really not that difficult, you come across a lot of dialogue options and it just gets repetitive or annoying because it's just like, alright guy, we get it, just shut up already. But you can turn the voice off, so I guess that is a positive. Now, in the graphics option of the game, you do have a wide berth of screen resolutions, which is very nice. The game has been running at 60 frames per second. I have not had any tearing, clipping, or crashing. Performance-wise, it has been running splendid. No problems on that whatsoever. Graphically, the game looks decent enough. Now, I will point out a concern that some people will have, or it may even be a turnoff for some people. The character you play as is a male warrior character. Big muscles, bald head, rugged feel person. So if you're hoping to play for a female character, or at least select in between a different style of characters, you're not going to be able to. Graphically, the game does look decent. It's not anything that is overly impressive, but then again, it doesn't need to be. It is a very simplistic style gaming, and while some of the artwork due to the level designs look good, it's not anything that's bad nor outstanding. Now, when it comes to the controls of the game, the controls of what you do in the game are actually very simplistic. You have your basic movement keys, attack, your counter, dodge, and your special power. It's not that complicated, and you can rebind them. I have not had any issues while rebinding them, so they're fairly easy to rebind, and you do have gamepad availability as well, if that's what you're looking for. The controls are very simplistic and minimalistic, which can be good for the style of the game, but also because there is not that much in the combat sense to do, that does hurt it in its combat performance that we'll talk about momentarily. Now, another thing that is nice is the game has two modes. It has an endless mode and a story mode. The endless mode is what is tied into the leaderboard. The longer you're able to survive, the further you're able to dig into the dungeons and keep going will translate into your score onto the leaderboard. It does also have 33 Steam achievements, so it has the content and the weight behind the price point that it's asking for, but does it have the availability to actually be entertaining or immersion filled? When we jump in here, first thing we're going to talk about are the levels to this game. You have the story mode and you have the endless mode. Obviously, endless mode, like I said, was just continue going until you die. Where in the story mode, it's these individual dungeons picked on these cards, at the end of which you'll have to face the boss. Now, during these different missions, you will have curses applied by the enemy that will affect you as you progress through the level. Now, these may be not all that difficult, or they really may make getting through the level very challenging, as the difficulty doesn't have a slider. There's no easy, medium, hard, or whatnot. It comes down to a randomizational chance. They've taken the elements of a card game and they've combined them with the elements of a roguelike. And when that happens, you're going to end up with a lot of crossover of randomization. As in a roguelike, you're not sure what you're going to face, or what items you will find, what cards you will draw. And apply that to a card game, and your chance of getting screwed over really increases rather than diminishes. Now, that may be a challenge that you're looking for, but really that's more chance. The game should be properly called Hand of Chance rather than Hand of Fate. So as you can see, as I've been selecting through these different types of bosses that you defeat and you unlock and you progress forward, as well as the upgrades through each one of these tiers that will make not only you a little bit faster and stronger, but also the enemy. So it's a little counterintuitive because while you progress forward, your opponents actually do as well. Now, I'm all up for having stronger opponents and more deadly enemies that you end up facing. But what they've managed to do here is not mix in different levels of enemies so that you have moments of, wow, I'm really a badass, and some moments of, wow, that was really hard. The continuation of increase in the difficulty during combat does stay with you. Now that may be good if you're seeking a challenge, as this is a roguelite and the element of death is finalized and you will lose the progression that you made forward. And that's where the issue arises, because when you select the different bosses that you want to fight, each one of these boss cards are their own dungeon, and so after you defeat one of these bosses, the items that you have, the money or food, the resources, they don't transition over into the next dungeon. So every dungeon is its own mission, and then nothing carries over. So you don't feel like there's any progression from mission to mission because you start over every time. And if you should die, then you really aren't losing anything but time. Because if you die in the game, going through it a second time on whatever boss you choose may actually be easier because the game is so heavily randomized in between what the level layout will be and what cards will be shown or placed against you or beneficial for you. So there really is no loss when it comes to what you have to gain as you progress forward through these levels due to the cards and the layout themselves. Now, if you play endless mode, you will have that continuational progression until you die. So that may balance it out if you're looking for an endless mode style. But if you're looking for a story progression with a conclusion of continuation of power, you will not have it. When we select a boss, we're going to talk about the cards that you have availability to. As you progress through the game, the amount of cards in your equipment deck and your encounters deck do increase. As you can see, 28 I have available. Now, when you start off, that will be a lot less, and it will rise as you progress forward through the game. The decks that you have are very simplistic. As you can see, there is a multitude of different weapons, and as I slide through the different cards, you can see more items, whether it be armor, shields, or hero abilities, or trinkets. When it comes down to hero abilities, you only have the availability to use one. So this card, Time Heals, during combat press 2 to twist time and return your health to a starting value. This is a very powerful card, but you won't enter battle with it. You have to find it or draw a equipment card throughout your progression in the game and hope that it comes up and you're able to select it. And as you can see at the bottom of the card, it has a sort of leaf symbol. This are the charges that the card has. Once the charges are up, the card will be discarded from your hand and you will have no longer the availability to use it. It differs here greatly from the usual card game styles that you may be used to, as this is a hybrid of the different styles. As we go through these different weapons and equipments, just because I have these in my deck doesn't mean I'll actually come across them. Yes, if I have more of one item, then my chance of getting that one item when I do a equipment draw in the game, in the dungeon, then perhaps. But you will be hard-pressed to see the majority of the cards in your hand. On average, as I played through, out of 28 cards, I maybe saw 10 in an average dungeon, and that's being generous. So the equipment cards aren't like your standard cards in a card game where you build a deck and you take that deck into combat and you're flopping down cards on a board and you're fighting the enemy and countering the enemy and doing damage in some regard. But they are more tied into equipment cards which you gain after certain events. Say you get ambushed by bandits, and after destroying them, it says, congratulations, you have gained 2 equipment cards. Maybe one of them will give you 20 gold, and the other will say, hey, here is one of your items from your inventory. That could be anything. So building a deck in your weapons and gear are really not that important. Obviously, you want to have in your deck more cards based off of what you enjoy, but with them being so many cards in your deck and the amount that you may enjoy versus the draw rate during your dungeon time, it's unlikely you will see or be able to play with the gear that you may enjoy that often. Now, when it comes to the encounters deck, they are a little bit different. As you progress through the story, you'll have locked cards which you're unable to get rid of until the boss that you are currently on is defeated. So you do have the availability to sort of pick which additional encounters that you may wish to spy over, whether they be combat or environmentalists, such as talking to a merchant or helping out peasants, or some sort of event, such as the metal ore here. As you traverse a particularly tricky trail across a mountain ridge, you notice a dark ribbon beneath you. If you have this card and Holy Forge, you'll be able to create a very powerful weapon, but the way the levels are, you might find the Holy Forge on one level of the dungeon, and then find the metal ore on a lower level and you cannot backtrack. So the cards do have availability to work together in some regards, but it is a lot of chance. Just because you have two cards that synergize well with each other, it doesn't mean that they actually will, because there is a large variable of randomization in the game. So just because you also have all these cards doesn't mean that these are the events or encounters that you will face, due to the fact that each mission, each hero dungeon that you select, they have their own cards and their own traps and their own encounters that will screw you over or challenge you that are added to the level deck that is created. And I'll show you what I'm talking about. When we jump in here, the cards that we have and the cards that are part of the level get all put together. So just because I selected certain encounters doesn't mean that I'm actually even going to see those, as the enemy has placed the certain dungeon level cards in my deck that are going to equate to the level design. So I can end up actually running more into his cards and less into mine, or more into encounters and troubles, rather than really using the cards that I was hoping to use. The card element of the game is really not done in a beneficial manner. Just because you can select certain encounters doesn't mean it gives you an advantage, because there is really no synergy. Any synergy that you're actually able to acquire off of the cards comes down from luck due to the randomization of how the decks are laid out. Because every level of the dungeon is randomly selected, so it can be a little bit new looking, and it can feel a little bit new as you progress forward, so it has the randomization of a roguelike that you would expect. But at the same time, you don't really have control over what you're doing, nor do you feel a sense of powerfulness as you progress forward, which really brings us into the combat element of the game. Now, I really like, and I will give props to the development of this game by Defiant Development, because they took the card-based game and they did more with it. They really expanded upon it, and in originality and creativity and the ability to really create something that is unique and pushes the envelope of development, they have done an amazing job. They have really opened their minds and just jumped right in and said, let's create something that is not your average, something that you don't see very often. And they did that well. Unfortunately, not well enough. There is really no tactical sense to the combat. The gear that you get is randomized as you would expect in between a card game and a roguelite, so the randomization and chance are doubled. So if you get the good gear, then of course your progression through the game will be a little bit easier, just as you may go through and gain a lot of gold, which will allow you to buy food from merchants or replenish your health from healers, or buy items that may help you on your journey. Or you may go through the entire dungeon and find that you're near starving or do starve, because every move you take will take away one food, and you end up through different events not having enough food. The game doesn't come down to a skill set, it comes down to a chance. So is the game challenging when it comes to the combat? And I have to say no. I'm not sure how certain people will handle with the difficulty or playstyle of this game. All I can tell you is how I handled with the game, and I did not find it difficult at all. The only times that I have died in this game are due to randomization. If I end up on a tiny little boat and I am fighting against 16 enemies, yes, you will fight against some large ass numbers, and some of the environments are very small. There was a time when I was fighting against a large group, about 16 enemies, in a small narrow passage, and in this small narrow passage there were about 8 traps. I shit you not, there were 8 traps and around 16 enemies. So anytime I moved, I would end up either getting hit by an enemy or getting hit by a trap. It's this randomization and variables which do you in. Tie this into the fact that, hey, maybe you didn't have enough food and you were starving, and every turn that you don't have food, you lose 10 health. Or maybe you just continue to get cursed, or you continue to find events that happen, such as landslides or ambushes or dark creatures or soul gamblers or some variable that you just keep ending up getting injured or having curses placed on you. It's not a matter of skill. It's not like, oh, how do I slowly navigate around this obstacle? How do I manage to not impede myself on these deadly challenges that the game present? Ooh, I come across a hidden chest in a dungeon. Do I want to explore forward or not? I say yes, I want to explore forward. And it does this mini game tied to the cards, which has a success or failure. Now there are certain perks, as there are curses, there are also perks that give you a bonus. They are hard to come by and you don't get them very often, but there is a perk that will give you a slight advantage in the randomizational card shuffle pick. This mechanic has to be the most annoying in the entire game because there is no skill to it. There is no watchful eye. It's not a which cup is the marble under as I switch the cups around. It's a look at these 4 cards. You have either a 1 in 3, a 3 in 4 chance of probability, a 2 in 4, whatever the success versus failure rate is. The cards then flip and shuffle, and you have no clue which is which. So it's not a matter of skill. It's not a matter of quickness of eye. It is nothing more than chance. Chance that you select the correct card and don't get a debuff. Now, you may see this as a tangent from the combat that we originally talked about, but this all plays into the combat because it rolls up to your experience. The combat in the game, as I said, is not difficult at all, and I've never been a fan of this style. If you've watched my other reviews, you'll know the Batman Arkham City style of, wow, I'm jumping across the map, I'm hitting my enemies, I'm really doing absolutely nothing but just spamming the left mouse button. And anytime I see a green alert saying that, hey, I'm about to get attacked, I just have to hit Q and I'll deflect the attack, or I'll counter the enemy and start attacking him. The combat is very easy. If you can take a quarter and flip it off of your thumb and grab it and put it on the back of your hand, you can play the combat. There is no tactical requirement, there is no difficulty, there is no awareness, there are no skills, there is nothing in the combat that would tie to the cards being useful in some regard, and the events or enemies you face being more tactically challenging. You can fight large ass numbers of enemies with ease if you have the correct timing, and it's quite boring. While I will admit that seeing it the first 3 to 5 times, it's like, yay, that's cool. The entry points into combat where the cards lay down and the enemies spawn up from the cards, it's a really cool animation. But after 3 to 5 times, maybe less, maybe more, depending on you, it's like, okay, let me get to the action now. Let me actually fight my opponent instead of waiting to see this happen. And yes, you can skip it, but even in the availability to skip it, there is a small window of either loading it up or it's just slow in transition. Whatever the case may be, there is a time gap in between your action in the combat there is a time gap in your movement, in the exploration of a card dungeon. It's always a little time gaps which really put pins and needles of just like, oh, come on, let's do this already. Now you may find this game more difficult than I did, and if that's so, then okay. But when the entire thing is up to randomizational chance and not skill or difficulty, I question the reason in playing it. I like a good roguelike game, and I like a good card game, because both individually have their own set of progression, power enhancement, and skill, where this requires and gives neither. So at the end of the day, the interface of the game is very slick, very easy, there's no confusion whatsoever. I love how you can select into your inventory with no problem. You can scope out what items you have. I love the fact that you have food that decreases. Every move into the dungeon that you take will increase your health by 1. There are curses and perks. You can gain a double of health from your food if you have a correct perk, or you can have curses which hurt that or hurt a large variable of different things. There are a lot of benefits to the perks and a lot of disadvantages to the curses that really impact the player's choice. I like that. They have succeeded in this huge environment of danger and success in a few perks. The problem is not the availability of these few choice powers or perks that you have from time to time. The problem comes from the fact that you don't have a sense of progression. Yes, you get through the dungeons and you beat the enemy, and you may lose and you may succeed, whatever the case is, but the entirety comes down to chance. You can play the same mission 3 times over, and each time it will be different. And while I give that kudos for the roguelite element to sort of mix it up so it has more replayability, the fact that they shied away from any tactical responsibility upon the player and shoved way more randomization upon the player is what hurts the game more than anything else. I like that each dungeon level is different, but your progression through these levels is not judged on a merit of skill. It's judged on a merit of luck, because you can go through 3 levels and never find any food. Yes, you may come across some merchants, but you can't buy food if you don't have any money. So if you're really shit out of luck because you haven't gotten any money cards, or you haven't found any money, or you haven't had any items that give you money in some regard, or you have the same issues with food, you're just screwed. It's not skill, it's just luck. And it's a lot of variables like that. If you get into combat and you end up on a map, is the map large enough to sustain the amount of enemies that you are going to inevitably be thrown at you the further you get into the game? Because as you progress further into the game, the enemy amounts that you face will increase in size. So if you end up facing 16, 20, maybe more opponents, and the map is really small, that's going to put a huge strain on your capability to actually progress or win. And if you throw traps in there as well, it doesn't add to a, oh wow, this game is being so difficult. It just throws it more into a, well, that sucks, I ran into that. And while that may not always be a situation that you come across, and while I can appreciate the game having a beautiful change of scenery, as the individual levels that you may end up fighting in do look nice, and it is a variable of, okay, this is slightly different from what I experienced before, and while there is some reusage of certain environments, it does have enough to where you're not feeling you're fighting on the same one continuously. But the combat is not difficult. So really, the only thing that's going to screw you is such a large number in such a tiny area filled with traps as well. Because the combat is so boringly easy, and you really have no powerling gain from your cards as you progress forward. Yes, of course, you may have an equipment card which increases your weapon strength. And if you get the right card, you will feel like, wow, my weapon's really strong. And you may end up with a card that gives you a better shield. And you may end up with a card that gives you a hero power, as you can only have 1 hero power. And you may end up with a perk that gives you a nice bonus. And you may end up with a ring or a trinket that gives you availability, something. But it is a lot of you may end up with it, because you may not end up with it as well. And a lot of times, you will complete these areas without having a trinket or a relic or a special item or an upgraded weapon, depending on what happens. Is the combination of all of this created to make a good game? Graphically, it's lovely. Level design and the way they've taken it is nice. The fact that they have created a new concept is great, but there is no tactical depth to this game. The combat is very simplistic, very easy, and because it's so easy, it's boring. Dying? In my time playing, I've died twice. And it wasn't because I was slacking off or it was really difficult. It just came down to randomization of bad luck. I ended up dying because I never caught a break in what I ended up facing. It was like, oh, you have to face 12, now you have to face 18, now you have to face 9, and curse, curse, curse. Trap, trap, trap. Pain card, pain card, pain card. You know, you get my point. So it's not a question of, wow, this game's hard. So if you're looking for a challenge, no. If you're looking for something casual, if you're looking for something where you don't want to really be tested, and you can understand the combat is very fucking simplistic. Just understand the combat is simplistic. Left mouse button slam, and as soon as you see an opponent green alert, hit Q, and if it's red alert, then dodge. That's it. That's all you gotta fucking do. It's not hard. So if you're looking for something casual and you like card games and you like roguelikes, then okay, I understand. It may be what you're looking for. But if you're seeking a challenge, if you're looking for something that really pushed the envelope as far as you may have been hoping, then this is not for you. The combat is a joke. The game circumvents far more of its utilities on chance rather than skill, and you never feel like you're progressing forward. So for a mass majority, I would say no, I do not recommend it. But I know it is an entertaining game for some people, and it will be good enough for a lot of people. So it's up to you to decide how you want to progress. But I cannot recommend it, because I was not impressed with it. I was actually bored with it. The innovation that they put forward to create something new, awesome. What they created, it's just boring. The exploration is slow, and it's not anything that's overly exciting. It gets repetitive because the motion is very similar to the motion you just took, so very repetitive. And the time in the combat getting into each zone is a little annoying, and it's just so mind-bogglingly easy. So, ladies and gentlemen, I've been SocioPsycho, and this is my reviews. I hope it's been of help to you, and I'll see you next time.